Everyone to TYT Community here on the TYT Network, the show paneled by members and fans of the Young Turks. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to tonight's live stream. I'm your host, Jeff Waldorf. Of course, with me today, Jordan French and Sean Fitzgerald. Jordan, of course, you know from last night, who was broadcasting in a show of epic dedication from a truck at McDonald's. He is, of course, not joining us from a truck today. He's actually in a nice little office. Hello, Jordan. It's good to see you.
Hey, Sean. I'm glad to be here and glad to have notes and show prep and not strangers staring at me over their Big Macs.
And don't forget coffee, which is my lifeblood.
And coffee. Yeah, so since I'm not at home, I can't drink alcohol during the show like I normally do because I have to drive. So.
Like I said, if you stab me, I bleed coffee, by the way. Like, that's how much I drink.
And for the record, Jordan got arrested for loitering yesterday. That's dedication.
That's actually not what happened. But it's a good story to tell. Good story to tell. By the way, how are you today, Sean?
I'm good. I was totally kidding about that, but... yeah, I'm doing well.
Good.
I'm ending some personal problems, but I'm getting through it. A lot of commenters were vicious at me yesterday, which I like. Keep at it. The more viciousness, the better.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have everybody here. It's good to have everybody here on a Friday night. We're going to keep it a little bit short. We've got 4 stories presented by me. Sean is going to present our last story. That should be interesting. Like I said, we've got a lot of social justice themed stories. That's our theme for tonight, social justice or injustice at this point. And boy, we've got a lot of injustice around the nation, so I'm going to start tackling that now. I'm going to start with a controversial pregnancy law. 26-year-old woman is the first to be arrested under a controversial Tennessee law that criminalizes taking illegal drugs during pregnancy. Mallory Loyola was arrested after a recently born daughter tested positive for methamphetamines. Now, the mother admitted to smoking meth just days before giving birth. Now, she's charged with a misdemeanor assault and is out on $2,000 bond. Now, this legislation, which is called SB 1391, says that a woman may be prosecuted for assault for the illegal use of a narcotic drug while pregnant if her child is born addicted or harmed by the narcotic drug. Now, that's interesting in this case. In this case, meth isn't a narcotic. Now, it's a horrible drug. Don't get me wrong. It's a horrible drug, and it does horrible things to you. But under this law, it actually wouldn't be included in the law. So it's going to be interesting how this plays out. But the more important issue, in my opinion, I think is the idea that women can be criminalized for taking a drug while pregnant. Now, when you think about it, it makes a certain level of visceral sense because she's harming the baby. But the problem with this law is the criminalization aspect that makes it less likely for the woman who's already in a bad situation to actually want to get help. Now, if it's a crime, then I think that there's actually a good chance that a woman might not even give birth in a hospital for fear of being prosecuted under this law. And that leads, of course, to a whole host of different problems and a lot of unintended consequences. I think that locking up women that have a real problem with drugs that need treatment is just not the right way to go. And also doesn't seem too helpful to the child either. But I'm going to go over to my panel and get their opinion on this. Jordan, let's start with you. What do you think about this law? And what do you think about the idea of criminalizing taking drugs while pregnant? Is there anything else that we can do? What are the options?
Well, I feel like this law is kind of being misrepresented. I want to go into some of the details of the law. So one, if you're guilty under this law, it's only a misdemeanor. It's not a felony, which is a small consolation, but a consolation nonetheless. And secondly, we need to just speaking for the law in general. It sort of does what its proponents, or opponents, I should say, accuse it of trying to get in the way of. And what I mean by that is, under this law, if you seek treatment or go into rehab during your pregnancy, even if you do that late enough in the pregnancy to where you can't finish before the child's born, as long as you complete the rehab, even after the birth, then that stands as a defense, and you're found not guilty. Or the case is thrown out, or Sean could probably go into the language better than I could. And secondly, we have to remember that this wasn't a fetus, this was an infant. This woman was convicted on this law because the baby was born with meth in its system. Right? This is not an example of somebody protecting something that everybody doesn't necessarily agree is a human being. This was a human being by anyone's definition, including the most ardent, pro-life supporter. The child was born, and it had meth in its system. So let's flip that around and say you have a one-day-old baby, and you somehow gave it meth. No one would be up in arms over you being charged with some sort of criminal assault for that. So as long as the law is enforced this way, I don't so much have a problem with it. I realize that I'm the pro-life person on the panel, so it's probably not super surprising for people that know me to hear me say that. But there's this thing that we do that we have to be careful of, where we have to avoid identifying, finding so much of our identity in opposing what the other guys believe, that we become the caricature they make us out to be. And what I mean by that is, although I'm not pro-choice, I do believe that most pro-choice people are genuinely they're not anti-baby. They're not fighting for the right to kill a baby. It's that they define when life begins a little differently, and they're fighting for women's reproductive rights. So there's a way to legitimately do that. And again, we're going to have disagreements, but there's a way to have that conversation. What we have to do then is become wary to be so knee-jerk reaction, so caught up in this, that we actually do then, as liberals, become or across the line where we're not caring about infants. And I think that some of the rhetoric that I've seen around this particular case gets pretty close to that line, because like I said, the child was born with drugs in its system. This isn't somebody with a 3-week-old fetus going to jail for a bad decision they made. And the law allows for rehab. Like, that's a way to avoid being made a criminal. So I don't know. I guess I would certainly I'm certainly sympathetic to the idea that rehab is pushed more. Maybe there's some sort of extension to that, or I don't know details. But what I see about this law doesn't necessarily look like just another pipeline to prison to me. It seems like a legitimate law.
All right, Sean, go ahead.
All right, so first I'm going to do something weird, and I call it CNNing, but I'm going to try and explain why. What Jordan said makes total and complete sense. Like, even if you're like the pro-choice people that are going like nutbag crazy over this, that say that they're in favor that it's not a life until it's viable. Like, this was like like she was tested when she was born, or the baby was tested when it was born. I don't know the gender of the baby, and it was and it came back positive for meth. So like, even if you are in favor, if you agree with Roe versus Wade, this wasn't like 6 months, within like 6 months or 5 months of the pregnancy, wherever the cutoff ends. It wasn't that kind of situation. That being said, I'm still against this law because there's no evidence, or there's not good evidence, that methamphetamine, being born with meth in your system, is worse than alcohol or coffee or anything like it. There's no studies that lead in that direction. There's not that many studies on the issue, but it reminds me of the crack baby scare that was like prevalent in the 1980s, where a lot of these ideas came from. and like people would report incorrectly that babies born with crack in their system had like the part of the brain removed that would make them human. Like, it was a ridiculous scare, and I encourage people to look into it. But it turns out that babies born with crack are actually far better off than babies born with fetal alcohol syndrome, or born who are smokers. And like, it doesn't seem like this kind of law would police those situations. And then even if it does, like, coffee's bad for you when you're pregnant, this kind of meat is bad for you, you shouldn't eat red meat, oh, you can't eat that much fish. Like, how far does it go? It seems like it's a very like unusual thing, and I don't think this law makes a lot of sense. But I don't agree with those crazy pro-choice people who are saying that it's a violation of a woman's rights because that's not a baby, even though, like, if she did meth the day before she gave birth, like, what's the difference? Jeff?
Yeah, you make a good point. Like, where does it? My problem with it is that where does it end? And also, once again, I want to point out the unintended consequences. Once again, when you make something a crime, despite it being, a misdemeanor, that might disincentivize people from actually going to the hospital and getting help. And I know it sounds like it might be a little bit of a stretch to say that, but you'd be surprised. I mean, I think that that's definitely a concern. And so that's where I would sort of disagree. I think treatment should be the preferred option. And I know what you're saying in the bill, and I guess they do push that a little harder. And if they do, then that's a good thing, because the last thing you want to do is criminalize that and throw people in jail.
Yeah, well, and I think that, I don't want to say what I think. Let me ask you what you think. And kind of flip the tables and interview the host here. Do you think that this bill does incentivize treatment though? Because it's, I get what you're saying. If you criminalize something, people don't want to admit they're doing it. But in this case, going and getting treatment before the birth is a get out of jail free card. Like, it makes you not a criminal. So do you think that would not only not lead to the result or the effect that you were worried about, but also incentivize against it?
What I think is that jail shouldn't be an option, for one. Okay, so like, you take the arrest in jail and putting stuff on their record and all of that. You take that out of the equation and you push them into a treatment program. I'd be on board. I mean, that's really where I would be.
Yeah, I'm all for drug courts over jail sentences. I think that's only the most logical thing in the world.
Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, the only worry for me is unintended consequences.
And the reason I don't like this is because it seems like we're doing another drug scare. Like, there's not, like, I don't know, and there's not strong evidence to support the fact that a baby born with a certain amount of meth in their system is long-term worse off than a baby born and having their parent taken away. Like not having the mother in it. So, like, I feel like this law says harm. Like, that's like the key word. It's like you do harm to your baby, and it's assaulting them when it's in the womb. But like, meth, even though we're all scared of meth, right? Like, it's the super drug. Like, it's, like I said, we were all scared of crack cocaine, and crack cocaine is no more dangerous. It's actually less dangerous than fetal alcohol syndrome if it's found in your baby's system. So, like, honestly, I feel like this kind of law, like, overhypes the fear of meth, right? And it incentivizes us to have things like the disproportionate sentence that we got from crack, because we have to protect the babies because crack is so dangerous. So, like, there are other unintended consequences of this, and that's like what troubles me more than the issue of like, oh, is this a woman's right or whatever? Because we pretty much agree that like 8.99 months on this panel at least, and that's a kid in there. That's not a fetus.
And once again, the broadness of it. I mean, in this specific case, a few days before the child was born. Okay, well, then again, there could be, a woman who's pregnant, and this very well could happen, very likely under a law like this, woman gets busted for drugs, she's pregnant by maybe what, 5-6 weeks or however soon as they can tell. Oh, we get to punish you under this law too. We get to add this charge to also having drugs. So I mean,
No, you can't. The law states
it
the
seems
baby has to be born with drugs in its system. It's not something you can theoretically charge them for. The baby has to have the drugs present. Now, to Sean's point, I guess my question is, so then Sean, like, let's say, because we all know there's kind of a scandal of how much drugs aren't studied, but let's say, evidence comes out and it shows that, meth is just this horrible thing to babies or whatever, and it's sound, and it's a good study. Would you change your position? Like, would you be open to changing your position then?
I probably would move on my position, but I would also be worried because what if you have everybody's on Adderall in this country, and Adderall can show up in a drug test similar to methamphetamine, and it could be if a mom is just stupid and not trying, because we think of recreational drugs as worse than like taking a prescription you're not supposed to at the time you're not supposed to. So like I would be worried about that, but in general, like I would, if it was like super dangerous and like it greatly compromised this person's life, then yeah, I would be in favor of some kind of way to prevent it. So yeah, that would change. But there's not that evidence, and we would have to definitely do something about fetal alcohol syndrome, which is worse.
Right. It seems leaving that out and just going after opiates, which this law covers opiates and not anything like methamphetamine. As I said, it's kind of interesting how they were able to arrest her under this. So, I mean, if you're going to do it with one drug or type of drugs, you'd think that they would expand it to others if their real purpose was to protect the children.
Are they trying to fill a gap? I mean, I feel like there's already laws on the books that cover things like fetal alcohol syndrome and stuff like that. So maybe there was some kind of gap with
Not to
these
my
drugs?
knowledge.
Okay.
I've never heard of.
I could be wrong. So
I've never heard of, and this is obviously not pure irrefutable evidence, but I've literally never heard of any woman being arrested for having a child born with fetal alcohol syndrome or low birth weight from smoking. I've literally never heard of that in my entire life. And we've heard of people getting arrested for the most benign thing in the entire world, and that's actually serious. I've never heard of that.
all right. Do you guys want to move on? All right. So we're going to move on to something that's probably going to piss you off. Yay. A former Colorado police officer by the name of Jeremy Yachik was found guilty of 4 counts of child abuse and 1 count of false imprisonment for abusing his teenage daughter. Now, the abuse reportedly went on for years, and one incident of it was caught on tape, with Yachik kicking, choking, punching, and ramming the young girl's head into drywall. This guy seems like already he's a disgusting piece of human garbage, especially to do that to a young teenager. Now, there were other abuses that were reported, and those were having her hands zip-tied or handcuffed, beating her with ropes, and force-feeding her hot sauce as a punishment. Now, it's not normal hot sauce, but something called ghost pepper sauce, which is reporting as being 10 times hotter than habaneros. Ooh. So we're talking some serious, long-term, horrific abuse of a young teenage girl. And as if this case isn't bad enough already, wait till you hear the sentence. Yachik was sentenced to a 30-day jail-to-work release program and then 3 years of probation. And that's according to Raw Story. Prosecutors allowed Yachik to enter an Alford guilty plea to 1 count of child abuse, which permits him to assert his innocence while acknowledging that he would likely lose at trial. Now this is a sickening case. This man was a police officer. Now, could you imagine if he could do this to his own daughter? Do you think any of the people that he stopped would have fared better? This is exactly the type of person you do not want to have you don't want to give a gun and a badge to. Now, he was fired from his job when this whole thing came out, but his boss, Police Chief Glenn Johnson, actually also had to resign because he was accused of covering up for Yachik. Look, we do stories a lot on police brutality towards the public. Now, this guy is instead being brutal to his own family. Now, for me, personally, I wonder how long it would have taken for him to have hurt someone else. Guys like this are not stable. And think of the poor girl undergoing years of abuse from this obviously deranged person. And there's no word if that girl will even be able to get out of that situation now. Because remember, 30 days of jail with work release, and then 3 years of probation. You'll be back home at the end of the month. Now, as far as that girl, I hope she can get away. But as far as that judge, it's not right at all. Not right at all. I don't agree with the sentence. What do you guys think?
Okay, so I said that I really didn't have a problem with the law in the last story. What I do have a problem with, though, is the incredible disparity between these two stories, even though it's essentially the same crime, right? And if what Sean said is true, then it's even debatable that if it's the same crime, but on the first lady's side. So the first lady gets indicted for child abuse to an infant and gets a year. This dude gets 4 counts of child abuse, what's absolutely child abuse. Like you don't have to do a study to see that. Like you beat a girl or whatever and force her to do all this kind of like eat the ghost pepper sauce or whatever. Like that's abuse. And he gets a month of work to release and then probation. Now it's good. There is a little bit of a silver lining. Just in the fact that not only is he off the force now, but so is the chief, who may have been covering it up, which, by the way, means he was probably covering it up, right? So at least there's that. But again, man, just the disparity of the sentencing here. Like this is where so the last story I took issue with my pro-choice friends, and this issue, I take story I take issue with my pro-life friends. Like the life, okay, I believe, it starts a little earlier than some folks might, but that doesn't mean it's less valuable as it goes on. So if we're going to be a society that says child abuse, of a baby that's born gets you this amount of time, you don't get to knock off the time as the kid gets older. That's just ridiculous. I don't understand how he gets away with this.
Sean?
First, I'm going to say something controversial, which is usual. The ghost pepper sauce thing, I don't know how bad that is. I know it's like super hot sauce and all that, but to throw my neighbors under the bus, I've seen that and soap and all of that, and like that's what parents do when their kids swear. A lot of parents do, and I don't particularly like it, but they put something uncomfortable in their mouth, which sounds worse than I mean, but like I mean soap or hot sauce. So everybody calm down. So like I don't know how bad that is. The zip tying and like all that other stuff, that seems like I don't want to over like hype it, but that seems like a torture and an abuse of power. Like those zip ties, I guarantee you, are the police issued zip ties, and he's not supposed to be using like equipment meant to restrain criminals on his 12-year-old. Like that's horrible, right? Jeff said early teenage daughter. That's not even a teenager. That's preteen. Like that is a horrible, horrible crime, and the fact that and like there's psychological damage that goes into there and all that, but the fact that he got this like reduced sentence, and I know you gave the judge crap because the judge is he had to approve the deal, but the prosecutors like dig in their heels at certain people, like they go after them, they throw the book at them, like they go over the top, they overcharge you, they do all this crazy stuff. Like the prosecutor had to arrange this plea bargain agreement. He's like, oh, he's a cop, I work with cops all the time, so I'll take care of him. Like nobody really cared about this little girl, and like that's the most horrible part. And I don't know, maybe he's gonna get counseling. Like I believe you can come back from this kind of thing, but like I'm pretty sure that parents that hit their kids are going to be parents that hit their kids. Like parents that abuse their kids are going to continue to abuse their kids unless there's a dramatic intervention. and I don't see that in this case.
Yeah, do we know, was he even ordered to go to, like, you know, counseling or parenting classes or anything like that?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
That's inexcusable. Sean has a good point, man. The whole making your kids eat something that's uncomfortable is kind of old school parenting. But yeah, zip tying until they black out and beating on them and stuff like that. I mean,
for getting carrots out of the fridge.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing. That's what started the whole thing. This guy's mentally, like, he's mental. Like, he's got some real issues. Okay, if you're gonna beat the shit out of your daughter over getting a couple of carrots out of the fridge, and one of his excuses was, well, she just wouldn't communicate with me. Would you want to fucking communicate with him? Seriously? If he does that kind of shit? This guy is fucking ridiculous. And so is this entire court case. How could you just 30 days? 30 days in jail with work release? Are you fucking kidding me?
When I first heard work release, I thought that meant he could go back to being a cop, which was but like that's the case. But this is it's terrible. And the fact that he didn't even have to admit guilt, like, who gets that deal besides a cop that's buddy with the prosecutor? Like,
actually exactly. That's the other angle of this. That's really kind of sickening. This guy is a cop, so he gets preferential treatment, or was a cop. He gets preferential treatment through the justice system, where anybody else's head would be nailed to the wall. I guarantee somebody who's not harming anybody sitting there smoking a joint is going to get more time. He's going to get the book thrown at them, while this guy gets off with 30 days and 3 years of probation.
Right, and I don't know how you guys feel about those people about people who have to check that box when they fill out a job application that says, "Are you a convicted felon?" But at least the theory behind that law was, like, violent people that you didn't want around, like, vulnerable people would have to check that box. Like, if this guy doesn't have to check it, then who does?
Yeah, this guy would need to check the box that he's a violent fucking asshole, is what it is. I mean, I can't lay into this guy enough. Like, how could you fucking sit there and do that kind of thing to your daughter? Like, once again, this is the kind of guy that you don't want to give power to, because it's obvious that he's going to abuse that power, because he already did. I mean, look at the power dynamic between parent and child. It's almost obvious that if he hadn't, and I know I'm speculating here a little bit, okay, but I think that it's not a stretch to think that one of these days he was going to blow up and probably kill someone.
Before we move on to the story, I want to just read something here. Like, we talked about, or Sean kind of briefly hit on what this does to on top of the fact that you're beating someone and choking them out, there's, PTSD, stuff like that. Here's the daughter was quoted as saying, "I don't hate him as a person," she told the judge during the sentence hearing. "I hate the things that he did. I still love him as my dad. I want him to get help." Like, how much does your heart break for this girl, man? She is clearly a better person than her father. And
a much better person. He did not lead by example, that's for sure. And she's doing the right thing by not following his example.
Her mom must be a saint.
Up.
Her mom must be a saint, or she's got some teacher that is like needs every teacher of the year. Like, somebody has set an excellent example for this girl of, like, what to be. And, like, as to the question, obviously no kid deserves to get choked out and beat. Like, you can't say that. But we do always like to throw out the caveat that we only get one side of the story. Maybe she was more confrontational. Again, he still took it too far regardless. But you read that quote. She's at the hearing for the man who did this to her, and she says something like that. Odds are her side of the story is probably fairly accurate.
What was not reported, actually, is after she said that, she held up a sign that had an arrow pointing to her dad, and it said, "He's making me say this. Please help."
Oh, Sean.
I'm making that up. But Jimmy Dore, who's actually on the TYT Network, has the best line about this in one of his stand-ups, is that people hit when somebody tells them, when people explain why they hit their kids, they usually say, "Oh, well, it makes them good people," and he always asks, "How many times do we have to hit you to make you a good person?" Like, there's no reason to like hit your kid. Like, I get you have old school parenting and you want to discipline them, but it doesn't work. You did something wrong, so I'm going to inflict violence on you. Like, I'm not buying it.
Yeah, it seems rather counterintuitive to me. So, and as far as the mother goes, the mother is actually the one. They were separated. Okay, so in case anybody was wondering about the mother, they were separated. They were, divorced, obviously. Actually, I think they were going to get married. They weren't actually married yet. And the mother is the one who caught this on tape, who got a copy of this tape, and she was going to expose him, right, and say, like, you need to get in trouble for this. And he actually was threatening. He's like, oh, bring it on. I'll never get in trouble for this.
Yeah, and you know what? If that's the case, they're separated, then there should be something included in this called supervised visitation, which means that he doesn't get to see his kid for a while, like maybe years or whatever, without somebody to supervise it, because it's like you can there are way more milder cases where actually the father does nothing at all, where he ends up with supervised visitation, and that's like just a situation, that's crazy family court situation. But if there was ever a case where you would require that, it would be a case where your kid is actually in danger or there's a potential danger. So I would do supervised visitation until like maybe the kid's 16, like something until they feel like she's old enough to like report him, because I don't want to have a supervisor all the time. But I'm just saying, at most times you want supervision, something.
And one little correction, by the way, I believe in the story she was 15, or she is 15 now. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said 12. Oh, you said when she was 12 things were happening. Sorry, I got jumbled up. I apologize to the audience. Sometimes I'm wrong. Supervised visitation until she's 18. Then she's an adult, makes her own decisions. That's my ruling.
All right. That's a fairly straightforward story. Not a lot of caveats in this one. So we'll go to our next story, and this is on the immigrant crisis that's going on with unaccompanied children. We talked about this earlier. Now, as we all know, we've been having a humanitarian crisis on the border with immigrants fleeing from El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Unaccompanied children are fleeing from gang violence in those countries, as well as poverty. So far, over 50,000 children are in custody of the Border Patrol, and I think personally that it's our duty to help them as they're refugees. But our compassionate Christian conservative Republicans have a bit of a different view. Watch.
That is an invasion of our nation, and most of them are coming across into Texas. They came as an invasion in this nation when Obama declared permission that would be granted under what was called the DREAM Act.
Breaking news tonight is the Obama administration knowingly creating a public health time bomb by sending tens of thousands of illegal immigrant children across the country with potentially dangerous infectious diseases. Are these illegal immigrant children, and certainly none of us blame them, are they bringing in dangerous diseases from their countries?
On the most basic level, we know they already have licensed scabies.
There are 50,000 who are children, who are young people who've come here. Are you calling them invaders? You're saying these children are invaders in your eye.
Foreign nationals that have come into the United States are between 300 to 500,000. My heart is broken for a female college student in Minnesota who was raped, murdered, and mutilated by a foreign national who came into our country. There is an illegal alien who came into our country, and we had a school bus full of kids in Minnesota. 4 children were killed on that school bus because an illegal alien driving a van went into that school bus.
Hold on a second.
Invaders? Check. Diseased? Check. Foreign nationals? Check. Rapists? Check. And check. This is our right wing when talking about children fleeing gang violence from a government that cannot protect them, mostly as a result of our drug war. But the Republicans, well, they want to do anything that they can to demonize these kids, and to blame this, of course, on Obama for sending them up here so they can distract us from Benghazi or something, or become Democratic voters in like 10 years. It's absolutely crazy. Now, the same people that tout themselves as the party of exceptionalism and morality that organize rallies and protests like the ones in my home state of Michigan, that sends the message of, hey kids, we don't care if you're refugees, go home and die. We don't care, we don't want you here. And that's the reality of it. It's not an invasion though. These kids are fleeing gang violence. In June, 32 kids were murdered in Honduras. Over 400 since January of last year. Now I realize that's nothing in America. That's nothing compared to America, where we've had 20 children wiped out in a day in Newtown. But Honduras has a population of 8 million compared to our 300 million. And according to the UN, Honduras has the highest homicide rate in the world. And most of those are children. And this is how our supposed Christian conservatives treat them. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. The fact is that you only love children as long as they're not black and brown. Only the ones stamped Made in America by white, affluent, heterosexual couples that are good Christians just like you. There is a humanitarian crisis. And it starts with you having absolutely no humanity. For more on this whole thing, I want to go to my panel and get your thoughts on the right-wing reaction and what's going on our border. Sean?
Yeah, so the Republican Party is so stupid that this issue is actually tailor-made for them to win on, as long as they don't demonize people. Like even Michelle Bachmann, I don't know if you guys know this, but Michelle Bachmann actually adopted some ridiculous number of kids, right?
23
So she can come in with she could come in with the compassionate angle, oh, I care about kids, I adopted them and all that, without demonizing the children as diseased invaders who only came here to destroy America and vote for Obama for his third term, which he's definitely going to go for. The president did, all the Democratic talk about dreamers, the president's deferred action, all this stuff, kids come over the border, they're saying we're fleeing violence and we think we could stay here, right? Our parents told us we could stay here. There's copies of flyers in Spanish that say you have to get into America by August whatever date, and then they'll let you stay. It's a new law or whatever. So there is a mixed message that is coming from our government or people in our government that is drawing.
Let me correct you there, Sean. They've actually, the Obama administration has actually sent ads down to those
now they're
different
trying,
countries
they're
in Spanish to say,
of course,
don't come here. There's no guarantee we're going to let you in.
Yeah, they're saying don't come here. We'll have to send you back. The president is the message that he sent out was an indirect message, unintentional message. It was totally I'm not saying it's his evil plan, but people got that message, right? And you can link that message back to the president if you wanted to attack him on this. But the Republicans are making it out to be the president thought of this and his thing, and these 50,000 kids will somehow commit in-person voter fraud and steal the election for him. There's a way to do this without demonizing the kids. The kids, I understand, but the kids is such a shitty situation because they come here. We don't want to send them back, but we're afraid that if we keep them, then it will send people the message to send their kids over here, and then that's a dangerous trip. So it's a disaster on all fronts. The Republicans could score points on this without being assholes. That's my point. And
being assholes is kind of their shtick, though. It's kind of their thing. They're pretty good at it.
All right, and I've talked for too long, so I won't get into the underlying issue. I'll leave that to Jordan French. Launch, Jordan.
Thank you so much. Hey, Jeff, sorry to put you on the spot, man. Is there any chance that you could that you have the entire Michelle Bachmann interview queued up?
No, I don't have the whole thing queued up. It's like 5 minutes long, so
yeah, that's
way too long
understandable.
for a video.
That's understandable. So, all right, so I watched the entire video. Now, I want to acknowledge that there is certainly a lot of validity to the mashup there and to a lot of the things that have been said. I don't know that this is racism so much as xenophobia. Like, if maybe the vitriol wouldn't be there, but I feel like if everybody south of us was white and this was going on, the Republicans would still be the party of close our borders, yada yada yada. And, you know, like I say, it may take a little different angle, but that's just kind of their shtick. And you can look to the Ellis Island days and see the same thing happen with Germans and then with the Irish. You know, we can hate white people too. But one thing I do want to get into, and God, I never thought I would see myself doing this. I'm going to somewhat defend Michelle Bachmann. I'm not going to defend her position is still wrong. I'm not going to defend that. But I am going to defend what her position actually is. And Van Jones tried his best to set her up. Like, it was like, and liberal news stories jumped on it and really spun it. But the problem is, those same news outlets also link to the video, and if you watch the entire interview, you don't get the narrative that they pushed at all. So Jones tried so hard to get her to say that, well, he started off with thanking her for adopting the 20-something kids, or fostering the 20-something kids, and all that good stuff. And then he said, so you're telling me, you know, if you saw these kids, wouldn't you take them into your home? And the answer is, the obvious answer to that question is, no, of course not. You don't abduct children that you see. Like, if you find an undocumented kid, you don't just steal it. That's not the response. There's a great John Mulaney bit about that, like when he says he's against the death penalty, and people are like, so you're telling me if you saw Hitler walking down the street, you wouldn't kill him? No, that's not what we're saying. You know, because that might just be an old man that kind of looks like Hitler. You know, the same is true with these kids. So Van Jones, he started off with this stupid premise. And then, Michelle Bachmann tried to pivot around it. And so it's one thing if you're a host and you don't let your guest pivot. I'm all for that, especially in politics. So many times we let, you know, politicians get away with non-answers. But what Van Jones did, though, was like take the part of her pivot that he wanted and adopt and bring it back to his original premise. And so she tried to pivot away from the kids and talk about the greater immigration issue, where, again, I still think she's wrong. But he
where she's claiming that 300 to 500,000 foreign nationals are coming in here to destroy America. And
right.
Look, the thing about that entire thing is that she dodged the whole thing. She avoided talking about the children at all. And just focused on how immigrants are horrible and how, you know, these foreign nationals are responsible for rape and torture and murder.
Right, and so that's what I want to get into now. So I'm done defending her, and it's time to get into to turn around and actually put her in her place. So give me just a second here. Let me get this up and running. Let's look at what she said. Now I want to preface this by saying that I realize. Oh crap. Okay. Just a second here. I realize that these stats are a little bit old, and that you know, stats do change over the course of the year. These are from around 2008, 2010, kind of in that range. So I get that, you know, things change, but complete trends don't reverse entirely over the course of a couple of years. So with that in mind, let's take a look at these numbers here. This is the rise of undocumented immigrants in the United States. You can see from 2000 to 2010, there was an influx of about 4 million, right? So Bachmann's whole point, based on a few anecdotes, is that these people are coming in here and they're raping our women and they're running over our kids' school buses. So there's the trend of undocumented immigrants into the U.S. Here's the trend of violent crime during those same years. Here's the trend of property crime during those same years. Now, there's a little bit of correlation, does not equal causation, you can say there, although I do think if the premise is true that undocumented immigrants are bringing in crime, you're going to have to really argue against the correlation causation effect here. But where that argument absolutely statistically breaks down is here's the incarceration rate per 100,000 people, according to the Public Policy Institute of California, a study done in 2008. Foreign-born adults have an incarceration rate, this includes undocumented immigrants, an incarceration rate of around 300, I believe it was 297 out of every 100,000. Native-born adults, over 800. So that factors in, because it's per 100,000, you've got the same ratio there. It factors in the disparity in population. And that also includes people who are in jail for being undocumented immigrants, immigration crimes, which is the majority of what most of these undocumented immigrants are in jail for. They're not in prison for violent crimes as much as they are for immigration crimes. And even with that skewing the numbers, they still have a drastically lower imprisonment rate of being imprisoned than native-born Americans. There is one stat that I want to address and try to get out in front of, and that is that a lot of federal prisoners are foreign nationals, as Congresswoman Bachmann would call them. That's because the federal government handles immigration crime. Therefore, they're going to have a skewed number of immigration-related prisoners. So that's a ridiculous stat.
I do want to throw like a slight monkey wrench into Jordan's thing, is because that stat that he showed about foreign-born people also includes people in the legal immigration system. And like we have this crazy thing in this country where if you come here through our ridiculous process, you can be sent home for like 800 million different reasons. So I'm sure, like statistically, in my opinion, that quote-unquote illegal immigrants are probably no different than the general public, except for the fact that they technically commit a crime to come here. But I'm also certain that your people in the legal process are much better behaved than any American group. Because they come here and they know that they could lose that visa in a split second, until, of course, how we actually get half of our immigrants is they overstay their visa. But I'm not including. I'm just saying in general, they're probably way, way, way more polite, because honestly, Americans are just assholes. But Michelle Bachmann's point is still ridiculous. Of course, you're gonna point to one anecdote, and a lot of people are gonna get riled up. I mean, if it was my family member that was killed by a quote-unquote illegal immigrant, I'd be like, close. Well, I'd be smarter than that. But I could see myself saying, close the border or ban all immigration. But in reality, your kid can be killed by anybody. Something bad can happen all the time. Your kid's far more likely.
Right. People are much more likely to be killed domestically.
By somebody they know.
Yeah, by somebody they know than anybody from, especially terrorism. If we're talking about that,
Right. I'm actually surprised, and I'm sure there's clips of it where Louis Gohmert is coming up with this conspiracy theory already, that the Muslim terrorist kids have learned Spanish, and they're the ones coming up the border. So, it's going to get much more vicious, and it doesn't need to be. There are...
Gohmert is already saying that these kids, and I didn't have the clip for it prepared, but he was also saying that these kids are here to rape our women.
Yeah. But I'm saying, I'm just saying, Gohmert is such a... Remember, Gohmert is the one who said that Muslims are learning Spanish to sneak in. I'm surprised he hasn't gotten on that. But there are so many legitimate concerns that they're just overhyping with that danger demographic. Yeah, if people come from a foreign country and they don't go through the process, they don't get vaccines, then it could be dangerous and all that. But don't pretend that they're all bringing in Ebola and all this stuff, or even if they have lice. Lice is not that hard to get rid of. You buy a shampoo, get some delousing powder. It's not. They're just
it's a good example of the conservative overhype machine, and that's what we really have a problem with. Is that they're coming up with these alerts. They're using a lot of fear mongering and scaremongering tactics, and we see that all around conservative media. Everything that they're against, they always try to find some sort of fearmonger, scaremonger tactic to say, look at that, the liberals are coming for your guns, the illegals are coming across the border to take your jobs and elect Democrats. It's always a threat to them. And that's like the conservative brain, is that it responds much more viscerally to things that are perceived threats.
But the thing is it's so unnecessary, because as I've said, like, you have the president like dead to rights on this. Like, if you play this properly without being vicious, it still kills Obama. Like, it still hurts him. So, like, it doesn't make any sense to be so vicious that people who are, like, on your side are going to be like... And I'm actually not on this side. I'm actually very pro-immigration. Like, I believe that you have the natural right to travel wherever you want, like, however you want. But, like, it's just... You have him. Like, if I'm your political consultant, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you're losing so many people. Like, you have him without alienating Latinos if you want it. But they don't want that.
It's because that's part of their... Unfortunately, that's part of their platform, is the alienation, is saying that anybody who's the other is a danger to America. And that's really how they've been as successful as they've been, because fear is one hell of a motivator.
Yeah. Well, and then we can't, close this story out without bringing this up. Again, kind of to the point about what we talked about like last night with the American instinct, as soon as you talk about healthcare, is to bring finances into it and talk about how much it's going to cost. There's a similar aspect to that here, and it's like we're talking about kids, and even if we're not talking about kids, we're talking about people fleeing. If they're adults, they're fleeing a horrible situation, and they believe America's a better place. One, that's something to be proud of. But two, I understand, as much as it sucks to say it, it's just part of reality. Like, you can't become the nursery of the world, right? Like America's not a daycare. You have to, there has to be some type of reasonable way.
But there is something to say, Jordan, about taking care of the things, of the issues that we actually caused.
That's where I'm going with this. Exactly. That's where I'm going. Our drug policy created the wars that these kids are fleeing from. We turned a continent into a war zone. So if we're going to try to resolve this humanitarian crisis, which I think we should, you can't just open the doors and let everybody come in. And by the way, that's what Obama's doing. He's enforcing the 2008 law that President Bush signed. But you can't say, okay, well, screw them all, send them away, if you're the reason, and you're being, us, America, the reason that they're fleeing in the first place. And it's just, and then also the thing is, there's a lot of truth to what Sean said earlier about, like, Obama kind of opened the door for mixed signals, like, to where it's easy to get confused about what the dreamer, the push for the dreamers was, and why people might think that's a way to get their kids, to a better place. But let's point out, though, that the reason people thought that might be because Republicans were saying that it was blanket amnesty instead of actually calling it what it was, so they kind of pushed that narrative. But also, like, this is an industry of evil people who smuggle children for money. Like, you don't think they've got a marketing campaign down there selling lies to people about sending the kids to America? You give us your life savings and your kid gets a free home in America. Come on, like, you can't put that on Obama.
But
and facing
to me, like,
that these children and families do in these places. I mean, I read a story earlier today where one family member, had a body literally chopped up in a bag, put on their doorstep, and like, hey, if you don't make your kid join our gang, this is what's going to happen to them, and this is what's going to happen to you. And obviously, somebody, if you're a parent, if you're a parent and you're worth a damn, you're going to want to get your kids out of that situation any way that you can. And that's what makes it such a difficult thing.
To Jordan's point about the Coyotes, like, marketing because they're trying to make money and all that, like, that's totally, like, fair. But, like, if you have a clip of, like, an American politician saying something, like, remember when Louis Gohmert got in a lot of trouble for saying that the Muslim Brotherhood was infiltrating the U.S. government because they kept playing that clip in Egypt to, like, rally people to overthrow that government? Like, there are, like, you don't, like, you got to be careful what you say if you're an American politician. And
I completely agree. There's certainly some validity to the point. I'm right there with you.
All right, so does anybody have anything to say to close this out? I mean, it's obviously a really, really tough situation, and you know what Jordan says is right. I mean, we can't just like we can't sit there and do nothing, but at the same time, what can we do to properly take care of these refugees, which they should be labeled refugees because they're fleeing from horrible situations. So,
Technically,
I think we need to do something.
Technically, they're seeking asylum, but that's a legal thing. Also, I just want to say drug war, drug war, drug war, drug war. Cause of this, drug war.
And the solution is ending this drug war.
It's not the whole solution, but it's a damn good start.
It's a damn good start, and I think that's the easiest thing, and the first thing that we should do immediately, because I think that would solve a lot of the problem. All right, so enough about that. I'm going to go to my last story of the night, and then I'll throw it over to Sean. So, a Texan minister recently committed suicide through self-immolation. What a way to go. 79-year-old Charles Moore, who's had a career of social activism, pulled into a Dollar General parking lot before dousing himself in gasoline and setting himself on fire. Now, a witness who was there tried to put up the fire and did, but of course, Moore's injuries were too much, and he later died at the Dallas hospital. Now, he had left a suicide letter, and in it he wrote about being ashamed over a lack of acceptance to racial minorities by the local residents of where he lived. Now, he wrote, "I will soon be 80 years old, and my heart is broken over this. America, and Grand Saline prominently, have never really repented for the atrocities of slavery and its aftermath. What my hometown needs to do is open its heart and its doors to black people as a sign of the rejection of past sins." Now, the Huffington Post reported that Moore suggested in some of his earlier writings that he had been considering this particular method of suicide to protest not only the church's support for the death penalty, but its refusal to amend its policy on homosexuality. So here's a guy who felt deeply, deeply shameful about those who profess faith, but yet are racist and homophobic. He's done hunger strikes to protest the attitudes of the church towards the LGBT community, saying that their stance contributes to the stigma against LGBT people. And he's done a lot of things to try and change minds. And this was the ultimate statement. In his letter he wrote, "I would much prefer to go on living and enjoy my beloved wife and grandchildren, and others. But I've come to believe that only my self-immolation will get the attention of everybody and perhaps inspire some to higher service. I have struggled all my life, especially the last several years, with what it means to take Dietrich Bonhoeffer's insistence that Christ calls a person to come and die seriously. He was not advocating self-immolation, but others have found this to be a necessary deed. As I have myself for some time now. It has been a long Gethsemane and excruciating to keep my plans for my wife and other members of our family." Now, if you can remember, self-immolation is actually sort of how the Arab Spring began. For me, I think that this is the ultimate religious symbol, giving your life for a greater cause. And I really think part of this had to do mostly because of the frustration of dealing with bigots and racists, that no matter what you do or say, they just don't listen and hold on to their bigotry and racism. And they don't follow the guy, the very man that they're supposed to emulate. And that's, of course, Jesus. I think this was the last attempt, really, to get to the hate. And I hope that the loss of such a fighter for all the right causes wasn't in vain. Because when it comes down to it, we actually need more living people to fight for the right cause than we need martyrs. I want to go to my panel and get your thoughts on this really sad development in this. What do you guys think?
I feel like terrible because this guy like took his own life, and like in America, you do something like this. I feel like a dick for saying this, but I don't think it's gonna have the impact that it had in Tunisia. Like in Tunisia, it was a guy. I think he had a stand of like cabbages or something like ridiculous, and he needed like a ridiculous number of permits, and like it was meant to oppress his business. And when he decided to protest in that way, it everybody was like, this is what's happening. Like we all feel like this. Like we all feel like we're being oppressed by the government. Like they're denying our basic rights to feed our family. And then that launched the Arab Spring, or like started the Arab Spring in Tunisia. It's like there's a lot of conservatives who hate like they hate gay people, and it's not like they're all building up against this oppression against gay people, and like this is the spark that set it over the edge. You know what I mean? And I hate to be like say spark, and I'm not trying to make a pun or anything like that. I don't think suicide is an effective means for things. Like I understand the burning of yourself is symbolic, and I understand what he was trying to do, but like you're an 80-year-old man. Like I know you might not have a lot of time left with your family, but spend that time with your family. And you're a preacher. You're in a position of power. Like you can influence people. Go door to door. Like ask for more acceptance. Like people love, especially liberals, love to bring out progressive preachers. Like that is like the thing. They love doing that. Like just like convince people little by little. Like you have a power position if you're preaching at a church. People listen to you. Like some people vote based on what their pastors tell them to do. Like just don't kill yourself. Like I know I say that in the suicide stories, but like I'd rather see you live a happy and actionable life than do something like this, because it's horrible and it's painful, and I don't agree with it.
Live and fight another day would be my advice. But Jordan, let's have you in this. I know this probably hits you especially hard.
Yeah, this is a pretty heartbreaking story. I understand where you guys are coming from, and also, you know, we have to point out that Christianity is typically, frowned pretty seriously on suicide. Catholicism more so than Protestant traditions. Man, the story is powerful and moving, in so many different ways. I want to point out, regardless of where you come down on suicide and on the issue, the thing that at least for any of my fellow Christians who are watching, I don't think there's any question about the sincerity of the motive behind his suicide. Like, this is not a man who, got in his 40s and realized that he was, stuck in suburbia and wanted to end it all or whatever, and, didn't feel like life was worth living and ended it selfishly and, with a family that he didn't love, wondering what went wrong. Like, this guy fought the good fight. I mean, in the 50s and 60s in East Texas, he took a stand against racism. Then, whenever he felt like he had given America enough of a chance to repent and they didn't, he took the fight, to other places in the world, and he fought their problems in India and other places, where he fought poverty and hunger and racism there. This man took up his cross and died daily for the sake of Christ and Christ's kingdom, and he did a lot of good. And I have a different assessment of what he did. I think he did exactly what you guys implored him to do. I think he lived a long life. I don't think his goal was to be happy so much as it was, to be holy. But that's a worldview difference. So Sean's, exhortation there, it's a worldview thing. And then is a man who he got to the end of his days, and his health is failing, and he sees that he's got one grand gesture left, one way to make the most difference in his lifetime, and this is what he chose to do. And I would want to point out, he did it in the parking lot. Was it of a Fred's or something like that? I believe, or some
General.
Of a Dollar General. So I know there's going to be tons of trolls on the internet saying, this guy set himself on fire. What if kids saw that? Yada yada. I get it. That's one argument against self-immolation as a form of protest. The thing that makes it so powerful is also the thing that makes it, not so great. But I do want to point out, as perfectly valid as it is to not want to subject children or anyone to seeing a human being burn to death, there's a bit of an indictment in the fact that we're willing to say that, but we are perfectly acceptable in this country with people viewing other human beings as subhuman or less than human because of the color of their skin. And I think that's kind of that was Reverend Moore's point, is that these two things are equally horrific, and we are unchristlike hypocrites whenever we're offended by one and perfectly fine with the other. And so, whether it was right or wrong, God bless him. I hope he rests in peace. And man, he's doing his best.
I just want to say, it's like I understand, and I believe in self-ownership, so I believe that obviously he had the right to do this and all that. And like the kids' argument, I hear that, but the point is you don't want it to traumatize your kids, and I get that. Like that's parental, that's like a natural parental instinct. Even though I'm not a parent, I'm like able to understand that. But the idea of setting yourself on fire is to traumatize the people who see you and know that you get set on fire. Like, it's to shock you, and you'd be like, what made that man do that? Because it's horribly painful, or man or woman do that. And then you look into it, like, the idea is to shock you and get you to see that this man felt so much pressure, and he felt like there was such an injustice in the world that he wanted to do that, or he didn't want to do it, but he felt that was the only way to get attention on that injustice. Like, that's the purpose of it, is to get that attention and get people to say, oh, wow, I never want to see that happen in my entire life. I know, but I'm just saying, like, it's, I just wouldn't go in that direction. I know that sounds like super asshole, me saying that. Like, I wouldn't do it, so, like, you shouldn't do it. And also, the people who are commenting, I don't know if you guys found this, but I did, saying, like, the most dramatic case of white guilt ever. Like, no, like, stop. Just let the man, like, don't mock him.
Yeah, I don't really think that there's a whole lot more that I can really add to that, to this topic. So, Jordan, do you want to get the last word in, or
yeah,
I'll move on?
God bless you, Charles Moore. I wish that you had seen more of the change that you desired to bring about. But remember that we fight the good fight because it's the right thing to do, and not necessarily because we know we'll get results. So you're a great man, Reverend Moore. God bless you.
All right. So for our final story, we're going to throw it over to Sean, who's going to present something. Sean, take it away.
Okay, so a Reason magazine story, or it was on their website, so a Reason.com story recently pointed out an interesting inconsistency in our justice system. It's basically a tale of two cases. In one particular case, a man by the name of Joe Morrissey is accused of having sex with a 17-year-old woman or girl that worked at his job. Joe Morrissey is 57 years old. He denies the allegations, but that's really an irrelevant part of it. He is accused of having sex with an underage girl who is perceived by the state as a child. On the other hand, in the same state, and basically, I think these cases were brought up because they were being arrested like in the same week. A 16-year-old boy is being charged as an adult for the death of an 8-year-old boy. Now, this is actually a really tragic story. The 8-year-old apparently died protecting his 12-year-old sister from this attacker, this accused attacker. Nobody's been convicted in either case, so allegedly's all over. But the point of this article, and the point that we're going to talk about today, is not really the specifics of the case, but how somebody can be a child at 17 when it comes to who you have sex with, and if it makes sense for people at age 16 to be charged as an adult. Like, if you can't consent to sex, is it okay for you to serve a life sentence, for example? Throw it over to Jeff.
Actually, let's go with Jordan first.
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so basically, the reason I want to bring up these two cases is not to talk about the specificity of the cases, but about the interesting, like, unequal enforcement of justice. Basically, a 17-year-old girl who had sex with a 57-year-old man is ruled as a child, and the 57-year-old man is criminalized. A 16-year-old boy who's accused of second-degree murder is charged as an adult. So how does this make sense? How are you, and do you agree that people under the age of 18 should be children in some cases, but adults in other cases? Like, that's what I want to talk about.
Ooh, man. It's a big question to throw out and answer immediately. Man, I think this is an example of, you know, something that has to be arbitrary, being arbitrary, and why you know, law is imperfect. Because I think we can all agree that there's a point where, you know, kids are different than adults, and so you have to have an arbiter, you know, a judge or however the process works, determine that, I guess, on a case-by-case basis. I guess ultimately, not to give you a complete non-answer, but I'm just glad I don't have to make that decision, man. I'm not qualified to make that decision.
Yeah, see, I'm more on Jordan's side about this. I think this is the role of a judge, being a judge, going by a case-by-case basis. I don't think that, as far as crimes go, there really is, and I've advocated for this in different types of cases, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all method of justice that should be meted out. You know, I have to, like, a judge is there for a reason. He's there to judge based on the facts of the case, and in the jury to deliberate on the facts of the case. You really need to let the system sort of do its role in determining what's the correct way to do things based on the crime. And look, I also noticed there's a little bit of disparity between male and female defendants, and I think that seems like it's also a little bit of a double standard at the same time. So I would really argue against that specific point. Like, hey, you know, like, if a 17-year-old girl does the same thing as a 17-year-old guy, why is the girl getting punished less for it? You know what I mean? You should, in that case, I think I would argue a little bit against myself, because you can't have that, you know, double standard. But at the same time, you also need to let a judge be a judge.
See, I disagree with both of you, and I love this article because we've actually been, how many times have I pitched this story in different forms throughout the whole time we've been doing the show? The reason I love this article is because a 57-year-old having sex with a 17-year-old is fucking disgusting. And if you hear somebody accused of that, you're like, what's wrong with you, right? So it makes you think that a 17-year-old is a child. However, an 8-year-old, and this 8-year-old died as a hero, and whether or not this 16-year-old is responsible is a matter for the courts, yada, yada, yada. But an 8-year-old dying, you're like, the person that killed that kid is a monster. So you're like, that isn't a monster, it should be charged as an adult. But you can't have a justice system that's inconsistent. Like, it has to be uniform. Like, I don't believe that this is moral. Like, you can't And by the way, the 16-year-old who's accused of murder is younger than the victim of statutory rape. So, like, that's the problem I have with this, is like, you can't be a child only when it's convenient for the state of Virginia or the state of New York or the state of Arkansas or the federal government. Like, the laws have to be applied consistently. If you can't have sex with somebody,
but not all crimes are the same, though. But not all crimes are the same.
But it's not about the crimes.
More importantly, what kind of crime it is aside, is there's a difference in a victim and a perpetrator.
Yeah, but but the rationale behind it is the same if you just stop and think about it for a minute. A 17-year-old cannot consent to sex in the state of Virginia because it is believed that a 17-year-old is too young to make that conscious decision. However, children as young as 14, when accused of certain crimes, are said to have the mind of an adult when they committed that crime. You can't have it both ways. Either somebody under the age of 18 is conscious and he or she is able to make decisions on their own as an adult would, and thus should be tried as an adult, or they are not.
Here's what we do is we separate sex crimes differently than other crimes. Did you ever notice that? It seems like we have a disparity in that kind of thing. Especially when we think of sexual things, we put them in a special category. You know, suddenly this 17-year-old girl could kill somebody, right? And be tried as an adult. But if she wants to have sex with somebody, she can't suddenly isn't in the mindset to consent. I get that. And that, you know, sounds like it strengthens your argument. But actually, that's where I think being a judge comes into play and looking at these specific circumstances.
And I don't accept Sean's premise. Sean, I'm kind of arguing with you here just to, you know, have a conversation, because really I don't feel qualified to have an opinion on this. But you know, we don't have to have a uniform standard in, you know, a post-neuroscience age for all crimes, because we know that human behavior comes from different things happening in different places in the brain. So it may be that for certain crimes, kids are, you know, their brains are fully developed, and for crimes that, you know, involve other actions, maybe they're not. And I'm not suggesting that that's what's happening here. Obviously it's not, because this is legal precedent that goes back way before we knew that kind of stuff. So I get that. But I'm just saying that the premise that you have to have this uniform standard of you're a kid or you're not a kid for all crimes doesn't necessarily hold up logically, you know, under the weight of science.
I literally can't disagree more. Like, first of all, the scientists are now saying that your brain isn't fully developed till 25, but honestly, fuck them. We as a society decided that 18 was the age, or some states have a younger age of consent when it comes to sex, but whatever. We decided that 18 is the age that you are defined as an adult. You can vote, you can smoke, except in my city where they moved that to 21. You should be able to drink, but like 18 is the age where you are considered a legal adult in most states. But somehow when the state wants to throw you in jail, and it's totally politically motivated, because you always show that one horrific crime that a kid did. But like, is it fair that kids that can't vote for representatives in any way can have laws that give them life in prison passed by those representatives? And just think about it like this. Forget about the case of the 16-year-old and the 8-year-old. Just think about the 57-year-old and the 17-year-old. 57-year-old has sex with the 17-year-old. That's a crime. That's statutory rape, because that is a child. If the 17-year-old murdered that same 57-year-old, then she's an adult. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's not consistent.
Here's what makes your premise a little faulty too. Is that the age of consent is arbitrarily higher and lower in depending on the state that you get to. So how can you have a uniform justice system when the state's laws aren't even uniform?
Well, the states should have a uniform justice system. Like, these are state crimes. The reason I picked this story is because it has two crimes in the same state. The 16-year-old is considered an adult because he's accused of a crime, but the 17-year-old is considered a child in the same state. So it's not even uniform in the same state. I understand that the age of consent is arbitrary, but I believe you have to have like equal protection under the law. Either you're protected as a child,
if
or you're
this whole thing, like the problem too that I have with this is that Jordan brings up a good point when it comes to the science, right? Well, you're like, fuck the science. Well, that's because the science says that you're not an adult fully formed with a fully formed brain until you're 25. That would pretty much put everyone under the age of 25 on the same level, no matter what they do. So, you know, even if that 17-year-old was, say, 18 or 20, what we would consider in the age of consent having sex with that 57-year-old, that would suddenly make her unable to consent. Hell, it would make everybody in the college age unable to consent, and all sex would be pretty much, you know, statutory rape. It just seems too, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right to be able to say that we need a uniform all the time when every situation is different, and you know, and in every state it's also different. It doesn't seem right.
You need to live in a society with equal protection under the law. Like the 17-year-old is being granted child status, and she's being protected with child status from this 57-year-old. Agree about the age of consent in Virginia or not. The 16-year-old is not granted that protection. He can get life, and this has an effect. America has more children who are convicted under the age of 18 serving life without parole than any other country by a lot. Like, it's not even close. Western countries, I'm sure some countries have other things, but that's Western countries.
No, I agree with Sean's conclusion. I just don't accept his premise. Like the conclusion that we're way too tough on kids and we stick them with, you know, punitive action that you know they ruins the rest of their life. I get the other side. They ruin the rest of somebody else's life. I'm not trying to downplay that, but I don't think you have to accept Sean's premise that you know, that you are a kid, you are a child or an adult at a certain age in every single, like, so because if you accept Sean's premise, then the age of adulthood, it's an arbitrary number you're picking anyway, and you're picking it for everything. So like you're going to hit a magic age where everything, whether, you know, it's getting a credit card, being able to smoke, being able to drink, you know, everything, like we have different, again, and they're all arbitrary, but they're also different situations. So I think you I'm right there with Sean in the practical, you know, conclusion, but I get there from a completely different place than he does.
I just want to restate my premise before we can wrap up the show, but in my opinion, if you can get life in prison, then if you can give a kid life in prison, then you should be able to have sex with that kid. I know that sounds. I'm just saying, if you're old enough to get life in prison, I'm not saying go molest children, but if you're old enough to get life in prison, you should be old enough to consent to sex. That's the clean version of what I meant.
You probably should have went with that specific.
But I'm saying, if you're old enough to get life in prison, I think you're old enough to be able to have sex with. I should not have said have sex with that kid. That was messed up. But you guys get my point in context.
You're a messed up person, Sean.
Editing. I'm not saying I want to. I'm just saying that should be the law. It should be consistent.
Oh, Sean.
Jeff, did you see that cliff? I think I just drove off of it. Question time.
That's normal. All right, so I guess we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A. I haven't seen any questions, so if we don't get any questions, we'll wrap up the show. So I'm going to watch the chat to see if there are any questions, but I guess I want to start out with maybe asking my own question, and let me think of one here. Coming up with questions are...
Did we have some questions from last night that weren't answered?
I don't think so. I don't think we had any questions from last night we didn't answer. So, okay, so for some reason I'm blanking out on basically questions I want to ask. It's been quite a long day here, of course. Well, Sean, okay, so a lot of people are kind of wondering about Sean. I've seen this comment a lot on Sean, you wear the cross. So Why don't you explain to the people who don't know why you wear the cross?
Okay, so I actually wear two crosses, one Nya and one Ya. This is the one that you see. And I'm actually an atheist or an agnostic, which means I'm a lazy atheist. I just don't want to argue with people. But I also was raised to not turn down gifts. So, like, this cross was a gift to me, and so was this. So I wear them as a way of respecting the person who gave it to me. And I feel like if I'm a non-believer, then religious symbols shouldn't impact me in any way. Like this is just a cross, and in reality, it's a Celtic cross, so it's Irish. I'm of Irish heritage, so to me, it's more of an Irish thing than a religious thing. And like I don't believe it has any powers except for the ability to ward off vampires.
Which seemed to be a problem with you.
It is. Vampires are very rampant in New York City. Don't know if you know about that, but yeah, it's a gift. I don't refuse gifts. Please don't send me bad things that I would have to use.
No, please send Sean bad things that he will have to use. But don't get any funny ideas. I can only imagine the things that'll show up on your doorstep. All right, Jordan.
All right, so we've got one question that was asked during the show that I think that I'll go ahead and answer. And the question is, I don't accept Sean's premise. Can TYT panelists get that as a T-shirt? And the answer is yes, absolutely. We will have those next week for everyone.
I wish.
So this is funny. That's from Truth Mashup, and I don't know if you guys were paying attention, but I was muted, and I was reading that question as the one question before you asked me the cross question. So, like, Jordan kind of stole my thunder there. Dan, yeah. You're still my friend, but that was me.
All right, so another question from Dan from Truth Mashup. He asked us how we found out about the Young Turks and what was the first episode that we remember seeing. And Jordan, let's let you handle that one first, and then we'll go to Sean, and then we'll go to me.
I was a junior in college. It was either late 2007, early 2008. I'm pretty sure it was 2008. And I was it was during the height of the election for then candidate Obama's first presidential term, and you know, a video came up in YouTube. I don't know if it was on the front page or what, and I was not sure who I was going to support. Truth be told, I actually really supported Huckabee early in the primaries. He was running in 2008. And if you're from Arkansas and you know his track record as a politician and not as a TV host, you wouldn't judge me for being a little pro-Huckabee, at least back then, because he was a pretty damn fine governor. But anyway, so I saw some videos that TYT had put up. So I can't remember the exact clip, you know, that got me or whatever. It would have been something about the campaign or about the election. The first clip that I really remember watching, like I liked the show, but they would say things. Again, I'm the regressive progressive. They would say things that really bothered me, and I didn't know if I was quite on board. And then Wes Clark Jr. came on one day and did the Matrix rant. And if you see the Matrix rant is on YouTube, it's a TYT greatest hit. Like, when I saw that episode, and I got to see it live, I said, man, this is like, that's it. This guy gets it. This is awesome. And that's really what won me over. And then I ended up getting to meet Wes Clark not too long after that because he's got ties to Arkansas. So that was pretty cool.
All right, Sean. What about you?
Okay, so I actually probably found out about, or I actually probably saw my first TYT clip. It was a YouTube clip, of course, in probably 2007-ish. Because if you watch like old archived TYT videos, a lot of times what they would do in their second hour would be to report on viral videos, right? Like there or other YouTubers. So like I would find them I would see a YouTube video that I liked. I would try and look it up again to show my friends, and it would end up being a TYT story about that YouTube video where they showed the clip. Copyrights were way better back then. But I probably didn't start seriously watching or in reality listening to TYT until I into college and I had to start writing noise in the background, and I know that's a horrible way to describe the Young Turks to its fans, but I'm better at intaking audio when I'm doing something else, so I would listen to them even though it would be on YouTube, which was funny because I'd be writing my papers and they would say something and then they would go to a video and I would hear sounds of outrageous videos and have to stop writing my paper and watch for like 5 seconds and then go back. So like I want to say 2008, 2009 when I first got into college, that's when I started really getting into it, but probably 2007, 2006 is when I first saw clips of them.
All right.
Go,
for
Jim.
me, yes. For me, it was somewhere around 2010, I believe. And I was out of work at that point, and I wanted to get into basically news, just to watch the news, right? Because I was bored, and I started flipping channels. And what I landed on is MSNBC, and on MSNBC with Cenk. And so, you know, I would every once in a while I would tune in and I would see Cenk on MSNBC, and you know, after a while I was like, boy, I kind of like that Cenk Uyghur guy. You know, I'm gonna tune in, right? And so, you know, I would catch it from now and again, and then I tuned in one day and I was like, who's this Reverend Al? Fuck this guy. And so I stopped watching it for a while. A couple months later, I was like, I wonder what's going on with that Cenk guy. Like I said, I kind of like the style, right? I enjoy the style. So I started looking on the internet, and I came across some of the Young Turks clips. Started watching that, started to get a little hooked, and then, of course, I started tuning into the live stream. And so I don't remember what the first episode was, but I know it was probably Cenk raging about something by himself in one of his first hour stories. So I don't quite remember what it is. I have a pretty sketchy memory. So that's it. That's it for me. So
I just want to add. I just want to add one more thing. Wait, Jeff. I want to add one more thing. The greatest thing, the earliest clip I remember was when I used to be more liberal back then. I like to say more ignorant. Was Jesse Ventura. They had one of the best montages of Jesse Ventura ripping apart Dick Cheney. Like, so if you find those clips from like when Jesse Ventura came back to life, you should watch that on the Young Turks YouTube channel. Next question. Sorry about that.
All right, so next question. This is a general question. Empyrean Cypher asks, what can be done by the public to push for harsher consequences for police that abuse their power, as well as fellow officers that allow such abuses to continue? I think I want Sean to handle this one.
Can I just say hello, guys?
Oh, hey,
Sorry.
Nick.
Hi.
Sorry, this looked like too much fun for me to not want to hop in on this one, so I just had to jump into the Q&A stuff. I'm sorry, guys. Sorry to be the late guy. Let me fix the cord there.
I'm sorry, Jeff. Can you repeat the question? I can catch it. Hi, Nick.
Yeah, we had some rude interruption.
I'm sorry.
We had a very
can't help being rude.
We had a very polite interruption. No Canadian has ever been rude in his entire life.
Yeah, seriously.
I once run over a Canadian's foot, and he said, "Excuse me," and offered me a bar of chocolate before he asked me to move my car. So, true story.
It reminds me of the meme of America invading Canada and the sniper kills an American soldier. Then you see this little chat bubble from the rooftop saying, "Sorry."
All right, so back to the questions. All right, so for Sean, what can be done by the public to push for harsher consequences for police that abuse their power, as well as fellow officers that allow such abuses to continue?
Okay, there's a few things that you can do. Like, obviously, I would actually advocate for special prosecutors in a lot of cases, because I'm going to super New York bias this question. In New York City, we have 5 counties, also known as the 5 boroughs, and each borough has its own prosecutor. So the police tend to work with the prosecutor in their county. So I would like a system where you borrow a prosecutor from a different county to manage that case, so there's not a conflict of interest, because a lot of cases the police and the police department in question is working well with that prosecutor, and they have a relationship, so they're going to get lighter sentences. So you want to try and remove as many biases as possible. And the other thing is videotape every interaction with the police. It's pretty difficult to get, even though they do get away with it, but it's pretty damning evidence when you have them on video committing crimes. So special prosecutors, the police, and maybe internal affairs, and I do think internal affairs in a lot of cases does a good job of separating themselves from the police, but maybe you figure out a way to keep them more separate until they're investigating. Then they get up your ass.
All right. Does anybody else want to handle that question as well? Sort of a general question to everybody. No? All right. I think that's a pretty good answer. So another question from Empyrean Cipher. Doesn't criminalizing a pregnant woman's behavior, including the use of drugs for endangering the unborn, lend credibility to the anti-abortion argument that it is a child before birth? Now, I think, Jordan, this is definitely more, I would think, directed towards you.
Yeah, it sort of does, and I think that's why I kind of went out of my way to caution against becoming so, like, letting this issue become such a political ideology identification point, right? Like that we're as progressives, I feel like we run the risk sometimes of hunkering down in a us versus them mentality so much that we're willing to put people human beings at risk for the sake of our own ideology, which I believe.
Are you saying politics is a team sport? Is that what you're trying to put across? The red team versus blue team?
Right. Well, so the thing is, like, we do all agree at some point, a fetus deserves to be protected, right? Like, that is where we have common ground. The disagreement is on, where is that point?
When, yeah. So, when's the cutoff? So we don't need to be so afraid that we, might lend credence to the other side. And I realize these labels are kind of confusing because even though I'm a liberal, I'm pro-life. But we've got to be leery about being so afraid that we lose the common ground. And so, like, even though in our hearts we do believe it's a human being, we don't want to protect it at all because we're afraid it'll give the other side ammunition. Like, you can't play with human lives like that.
Jordan, I want to jump in actually with a very brief question for you, and it follows up on this topic. You are pro-life, as you said. My question would be, on what side of the pro-life argument are you? Because I know lots of people up here in Canada who would say they're pro-life, but when quizzed on it, they're against laws abolishing abortion. They're against anything that restricts the practice. Really, they don't like the practice, but they don't want to restrict that right to other people. Would you say you fall into that sort of category, or are you more on the side of we should probably not have it legal at all?
There's a lot of nuance to what I believe. In terms of, like, what I believe is right, I'm against it, pretty much in any situation. Again, even there's a little bit of nuance, but that's because life is complicated. So where I come from is I believe that where we do have common ground as a society is that it's wrong to take a life. Where we don't have common ground is where that life necessarily begins. And I acknowledge that a lot of that comes from my religious beliefs. A lot of my position on that comes from my religious beliefs, and so I can't force that on other people. So what I do believe then is, like, from a place of, what I think is right in the confines of, the Constitution. I do believe that abortion probably should be restricted. However, I have to realize that there's not enough common ground on when life begins to deny that from people in, like, cases of rape, incest, or endangering the mother's life. Like, because there's not a consensus on the fact that it's a human being, that we have to at least have those exceptions. And I don't necessarily like some of those exceptions, but I don't feel like constitutionally I have a right to force my belief on people in those situations.
I just want to jump
for just a second here. I want to kind of jump in and kind of address the. No. I want to address the fallacy.
No. Jeff first.
I want to address I want to address the fallacy, right, of calling it pro-life versus pro-choice. I think we can all agree that we're all pro-life, right? But we're also pro-privacy. That's really what Roe v. Wade was about, was allowing the woman the privacy to be able to make her own decisions.
See,
So,
I also just want to add on to that and say that I don't like the pro-life, pro-choice dichotomy for actually a very different reason. Is because I've kind of hinted at, you can be pro-life and pro-choice at the same time. You can be against it in your personal life. You cannot really want to feel like it's right. You can say, look, I think even from the moment she tells me she's pregnant, that it's my child, I don't want to take that life. I view it as a life. That's fine. Where you can be pro-choice is you can say, but I'm not going to let other people who may need it or who disagree with me, I'm not going to deny them that right if that's what they want, if that's what they feel, and especially if that's legal within the law, binds the law, and I don't want to make it illegal. So you can be both at the same time. It isn't a black and white issue. I think Jordan Hyde did a fantastic job of explaining his position, despite all the intense nuance in it, is that this is a position that if we are, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't have some nuance at all, you are not on the right side of the issue at all, regardless of if you're on the pro-legal abortion or pro-life side. If you don't have any nuance in your position on this one, then you were in the wrong. Period. End of discussion. This is, out of all the issues on the table today, this is the one issue where we should all be mired down in nuance. And I think a lot of us are. The problem is the rhetoric pulls us back to the simplicity of both sides. So we have to try and get through the rhetoric into the nuance, which we don't do enough of, even though we do hold the nuanced positions in our personal lives.
All right, I just want to say I will actually answer the question, because the question was, and it's nice that Jeff went to Jordan, but the question was literally for anybody who's pro-choice. Like, if you listen to what he asked, isn't criminalizing what parents do under when they're pregnant, what a mother does when they're pregnant, lend credence to the pro-life argument. Jordan is pro-life, so like that. The question is this particular law a sneaky way to be pro-life? And that's actually not the case. It depends on if the baby tests positive for drugs when they are born. Now, according to the law, according to Roe v. Wade, that child is an abortable fetus up until 24 weeks. After that point, it's an independent life because it can exist outside the womb. So this law would actually still be consistent with Roe versus Wade, because the drugs, you're doing the drugs right before you give birth or within 3 months of giving birth. That's legally in 49 states except for New Jersey considered a non-abortable baby. So that is a life. So that baby is viable. So yeah, this law does not contradict Roe versus Wade.
All right, so something that's probably also directed a bit more towards Jordan. Polly69 wonders how many pro-life people are actually anti-death penalty. Jordan, I know you're certainly one of those people who are the anti-death penalty.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm pro-life, I don't think that human beings have a right to take the life of another human being. And again, that comes from a place of faith for me, so I'm iffy about forcing that on other people. Just under the Constitution, I don't think I have that right. But I think Scripture is pretty clear that God alone is the arbiter of that ultimate judgment. And so I leave it to Dan's point last night. Like, if as a Christian, I believe that God's justice is ultimately perfect. So I really don't have any right to try to hasten that decision by taking somebody's life in any situation. And that's another reason why I never have pursued a career in politics, is because I think, like, politicians, at least on the national level, like, you have to do things that Christians can't do. Like, for instance, like, countries have to have a military and defend themselves when they're invaded, but I would have some serious problems about ordering people to their deaths, and so I would make a horrible president. So I could never dream of running for office because of stuff like that. Like, I don't think Christians should be in places of power like that. And early Christians kind of agreed with me. They refused to be judges and soldiers. There certainly are some pro-life, anti-death penalty people out there. I'm one of them. I wish that we were a little bit more vocal than we are. But the media hates nuance and loves sound bites, so you're probably not going to get an adult position like that out of a lot of people on TV.
And to answer the question about exactly how many, the answer is actually 29. There are 29 people in the country that are both pro-life and anti-death penalty. That is an exact number.
There's a chance Sean might be pulling these numbers from somewhere. Probably somewhere dark. Anyways, another question, and this one actually is directed towards Sean. Yay.
Oh, God.
This is from Imperium Cypher, TYT Talk. He asks, are there times when you felt like your position on an issue was so different from everyone else on the panel that you had to rethink your position? If so, could you recall? I could probably answer that and say that no. But Sean, let's let you answer it.
Thank you for stealing my thunder. But no, I'm always right all the time. No,
someone's wrong.
I'm gonna be an ass and not remember an example, but there are times where we'll do a story and like I'll have a position, and then that position is built on a foundation of not having read the story properly, and Jeff will introduce the story very well, and I will reverse what I'm going to say during the show, but I don't think that was really what the question was about. Yeah, there have been examples. I can't think of a specific one. I don't want to sound like an ass, but they're more. There's more dependent on a certain type of regulation. Maybe, I don't know. I can't think of a great example. I'm sorry.
Fail.
So the answer is no. I'm always right.
And you can end it in the Sean fashion by saying, agree to disagree.
There are times though where everybody on the panel disagrees with me, and I feel a little uncomfortable.
That's normal. Apparently, we're a pretty progressive panel.
Even the quote-unquote libertarian who surprisingly supports some very large, big government sort of policies. But at any rate, let me just move on from that. I don't want Sean to jump in on that. I kind of have a slight question. It's more of like a thoughts kind of question on it, and the reason being, I don't know how knowledgeable you guys are on this because I've been following it somewhat closely, probably more than most people. The Malaysian plane that was just shot down. Thoughts on that?
Malaysia.
Yeah, this is why it's a thoughts sort of question. It's not like.
I got it. Malaysia, just shut down your airport. No, but in all seriousness,
Malaysia has been having a really hard time lately. Let's just say I don't plan on booking any flights with them anytime soon. But no,
or flying over the Ukrainian-Russian border anytime soon.
Right.
I'd read some reports, and I don't know I can't really speak to the validity of some of these, but they're saying that pro-Russian militants were responsible for shooting it down. We don't know the motives. We don't know if Putin had any sort of input on this. I can't imagine what would possess anybody to shoot down a Malaysian passenger plane anyway.
I can
that was filled with a lot of Dutch.
I can sort of answer that. Sorry, you finish your point, but I'll answer that after.
Well, I was just saying that it's not exactly filled with like anti-Russian people. I mean, there was a lot of Dutch. There were some Australians. There were actually people heading towards to Sydney for like an AIDS conference, right? There were a few people on board. The original estimate was like over 100, and I think they had to revise it down to like in the single digits to like 7 or something. But still, I don't think that has anything to do with it, to be honest with you. I think that's massive speculation, and that's what you see whenever something like this happens, conspiracy theories that will come out and say, Putin shot it down because he wants gay people to die from AIDS. What are you talking about?
Here, let me let me just jump in and sort of explain what happened. So a couple days before this incident, the pro-Russian rebels, although, well, I guess it's fair to call them pro-Russian rebels at this point, although where they're getting their arms is a much greater question, especially some of the hardware. Well, but anyway, a couple days ago, they shot down a Ukrainian fighter jet near the border at about, I think it was 6,000 feet, 6,000 meters or something in the air. Really high up, well beyond the range of any sort of handheld device could. And they took credit for it and claimed that they did this thing. So the question then became, what kind of hardware could shoot down a plane at that height? It's certainly not anything handheld or anything any rebels get. Well, a Buk missile launcher could, which is a tracked vehicle missile launcher, the kind that a professional military has, not your basic rebels. So I think the prevailing theory now is that, and I think there's a substantial amount of evidence to back this up, the rebels with this missile launcher, and it's unclear how exactly they got it, and it's particularly suspicious that it's a Russian-made weapon, shot down this plane thinking it was another Ukrainian fighter jet. That I think seems to be the prevailing theory was, and the problem is Russia is denying it, but they're denying it but not really saying enough. They're not really expressing enough remorse. They're not taking enough, I guess they're not apologizing enough for it. You could say they're not demonstrating that they're deeply sorry about this thing. In part because they want to deny any culpability, but the fact of the matter is there's very few other ways that these rebels could have the hardware to shoot down the plane in the first place unless it was from Russia. And then the other question is the operator of a rather complicated piece of machinery like this, was he a Russian soldier, or was he a pro-Ukrainian trained, or pro-Russian Ukrainian trained to use it? Those I think are some of the big questions, at least from my end.
So there's all right. So in terms of the question everybody's asking, why would you shoot down a passenger jet? Nick kind of answered that there. So these Buk missile launchers, they have radars in them that read certain transponders. Civilian planes use a type of transponder. Military planes use a type of transponder, and then there's a proprietary type that the Buk missile launchers read. And so, like, these are probably untrained rebels who don't really, have the equipment to judge friendly or foe. They have this new toy that they can shoot down the bad guy with, or to them is the bad guy. And they shot down the wrong people because it had a civilian transponder that didn't read back a friendly signal like they were used to. They just saw that their radar lit up and there was a target in range, and they pulled the trigger. That's probably what happened. As for if they got it from the Russians or not, I mean, who knows what Ukraine left behind, because they took out of Crimea, pretty rapidly and pretty in a pretty unorganized fashion. So I mean, it's all speculation at this point. And then so if I could just have a little bit of fun, or not fun, fun's a horrible word. I'm sorry, I pulled a Sean there. That was a horrible thing to say in this situation. If I could,
you are correct.
If I could pull a CNN here and speculate without any evidence, but hopefully this is a reasonable speculation. We also know that whenever there's unrest, there's proliferation of weapons. There's a lot of terrorists in the Balkan region. It's kind of a hotbed. So there's a good chance that some bad players who aren't involved in this conflict at all and are just bad people got their hands on some equipment and saw a chance to do what terrorists do. And my fear is that, like, maybe that's true and it has nothing to do with the politics here, and it's not Russia and it's not Ukraine, it's just terrorists, and it's going to be our generation's Gulf of Tonkin. That it might be a political thing that has nothing to do with what it's made out to be, and it's used as an excuse to, to get the war drums going.
No, I mean, I was with you until the last thing about getting war drums. I mean, war drums, by war drums we're talking supplying armaments. That's, hands down, easily. If by war drums you mean actual boots on the ground, there is no way in holy hell any sort of NATO boots on the ground are going into Ukraine unless Russian boots set foot into Poland. That is the only time NATO will ever move against the Russians, because Poland is in NATO. Otherwise, they're as far as they're going to go is supplying arms and intense sanctions and sending forces to the region in NATO countries, not to Ukraine. At least not in a NATO capacity. Maybe as advisors in some role, and probably actually more legitimately as advisors this time than in most other cases where we've sent advisors in. But this is the one conflict that you don't want to accidentally spark. And nobody really wants this, not the Russians, not NATO. Everyone is treading carefully on that one. So, I mean, arms supplies, sure, that'll happen. Yeah, maybe some advisors are actual like training, but nothing beyond that unless Russia takes some serious actions against other countries in the region that are part of NATO.
I think Nick has a very underestimated understanding of what proxy wars are. But I mean, what he says about like U.S. versus Russia in a hot war is absolutely true. But could this start another series of Cold War era proxy war?
Oh, hell yes, it could. Absolutely it could. Hands down, easily. This year alone has undone probably at least a decade's worth of diplomacy with Russia. It's just been insane, the mess that's happened there. And I do have one question, Jordan. Maybe it was a misstep on your part. Maybe there's something in the story, but I was under the impression that this was actually on the Russian-Ukrainian border in the east of the country, not in Crimea. So not where they left any of their armaments behind, and where they had stated the Ukraine has no weapons of these in this region because this is a hotbed region. They don't want to keep any arms laying around. At least that was my understanding. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not exactly certain where it crashed. So
no, you're probably absolutely right. Like I said, that was just me like totally throwing complete I don't believe that at all. Like what this is you've got some guys that don't know how to use a weapon system that got a chance to shoot it and they shot it. That's all that happened.
Yeah.
Pretty good aim for a first try.
I believe the system does most of the work.
The system does most of the work. I'm still not sure the technicality required in operating it, and I'm wondering if there would maybe be some training behind it, but maybe not. I mean, Russia has a long history of making.
There would be some sort of that they would actually show you how to actually use the damn thing.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking a little more intensive hardware, but Russia. Let's be honest. Russia has a long history of making weapons that are simple to use. By far the most world-changing and best example of this is the Kalashnikov AK-47. A piece of machinery so simple, so reliable, and so lightweight. A child can use it, clean it, disassemble it, fire it. It's designed to be just the most easy-to-use thing. There are tanks in the Second World War. The T-34 is supposed to be so simple to drive. Everything is very straightforward. Russia has a very long history of making things that they could easily train anybody to use, probably for that reason, so that if they have to train somebody, they can do it quickly. So I guess it does make the training of a pro-Russian Ukrainian much more likely, although I'm still unsure how many of the pro-Russian Ukrainians are actually Ukrainian and not Russians, but we'll leave that issue aside.
All right, so Israel versus Palestine. Discuss. That's one of our questions.
Okay.
This is going to be
let me jump in on this first because I like this topic. Well, like as much as someone can like a very macabre and depressing subject.
Well, remember, we're on TYT Community. We discuss depressing topics.
And if you're Sean, you even crack terrible jokes about them in a tone that's so unclearly or being sarcastic that everyone kind of looks shocked for a second. But I digress. So this issue is something I've been following for years now, quite closely. I mean, I think I've said before, my old job, I used to always log in on the forums and CNN and straight to an Israel-Palestine story, and read it and follow up and dialogue, and you'd be surprised how many Israelis you can talk to on those. Not doing anything other than just being commentators, and they're very upfront about who they are and stuff, and they're not in any official capacity, but they have a vested interest in the story. CNN, at least theoretically at the time, had a reputation for being a reliable news source, so it makes sense someone would go to that. But you get very bogged down in the nature of this conflict, and it's just so difficult because on the one hand, Israel has the right to exist, obviously. And part of the challenge is there has never technically been a Palestinian nation, and that's true on the facts. There hasn't been a nation called Palestine, at least recognized. They're trying for it, and they have every right to. There's been the British Mandate of Palestine, which referred to a region, and that was like a British-controlled region. That was not a nation. So you get bogged down in issues of nationhood and who has a right to a nation. Arguably, both have a right to a nation, but then the issue is who should have what land, what should the borders be. So then the solution offered is a one-state solution, but then you have issues of actual apartheid, where it's a majority in your own country are being repressed. So there's no clear-cut answer. That's basically what I'm trying to get at. Should Israel be going into Gaza? Fuck no. Should Israel be dropping bombs? I mean, granted, I do take the argument that Hamas absolutely has a vested political interest in keeping civilians in zones that Israel has stated they're going to hit. And I've heard it stated before that Israel has dropped things like leaflets stating, like, we think there's a missile launcher here, please vacate the area, we want to hit it. I don't know how true that is. Maybe that's just propaganda. It strikes me as something that a country would try to do. But here's the thing. After that doesn't work, you shouldn't go ahead with the attack. As much as you state you should, and as much as I understand that Israel thinks it has to put on a strong face because it's fought for more than half a century to try and continue to defend its right to exist against people that have tried to fight against it. No, we're not talking just Palestine in this case. We're talking Egypt, we're talking Syria and Lebanon, we're talking pretty much the entire region except Jordan that have waged wars against Israel to try and actually eliminate it, or at least push borders back at various points. So I get that Israel has that strong stance, but they need to drop the mentality, because at this point they're fighting against an opponent. They don't have opponents that are vastly outnumber them, at least not who are engaging in active warfare against them. Egypt and Syria have not in a while, and Lebanon kind of does, but not really.
Egypt is a stronger ally to Israel than they are to the Palestinian people.
Oh, hell yes, they are. Egypt turns away more Palestinian refugees and denies more Palestinian aid than any other country. That's
particularly
Egypt.
Hamas. Egypt might be more anti-Hamas than Israel is, and I know that sounds like a crazy thing to say.
No, it's Egypt despises Hamas. Egypt despises Hamas with a huge passion. But the challenge is...
Well, the Egyptian government, too, is very, very... Obviously, they're very, very hard on the Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas is sort of related to and has ties to, as far as I know. So, obviously, it makes sense that Egypt's going to be like, nope.
Well, here's the thing. This went on even before. Well, I guess you could tie it back to the Muslim Brotherhood thing, too, because they were very persecuted before Morsi. Morsi kind of brokered a peace deal, which I think riled up some concerns for some Egyptians too. They're like, what's this guy doing talking to the Hamas? But Israel can't keep doing this process. It cannot keep maintaining that policy at this time. It's well demonstrated that it can defend its own borders, and should the need arise, it has every right to. But its opponent right now is Hamas and Palestinian militants, who are vastly outnumbered by the Israeli army. They're grossly inferior as far as training and equipment goes, and they're facing a nation that has the backing of most of the developed world. Israel has all the cards. They have literally no need to continue to be so heavy-handed with the Palestinians. They need to back off. They really do, or a lot of the cards that they hold will start to fall away. They'll start to lose international support if they keep this up. I mean, it's not there yet, but irritation with Israel's actions has definitely increased, and it can increase more. So Israel seriously needs to back off with this stuff, and they actually need to try and take dialogue seriously. I get that Hamas doesn't. I get that they keep launching rockets, and I get that that's terrifying being there. I totally understand that, and I understand that this is almost like a very protective lashing out in some ways against Gaza. The whole thing in the West Bank and the settlements is a whole other issue, and Israel is completely at fault for that one. But I get that the rockets are causing a lot of fear, and Israel, it's motivating Israelis to support their army. I get that. I get that it's terrifying. I get that it's damaging and it could kill people. But you have to be the bigger man here. You can't stoop to Hamas's level, because you're losing support for it. You are.
So here's a follow-up question from Imperian Cypher. He says, does anybody on the panel think that religious beliefs from, quote, it's the Holy Land, right, all the way to we want Armageddon from some of the Dominionist Christians play a significant role in this Israeli issue? Do you think that has anything to do with this?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I was refreshing the chat.
I
guess just the last.
Do any of us think that that religious beliefs from saying that Palestine, Israel is the Holy Land, all the way to the Christian Dominionists saying that we want Armageddon to happen and that's why we're supporting the Jews? Does anything like that play a significant role in this Israeli issue?
Yes and no. I mean, it's if you want to look at the root cause of the issue, it of course goes back to the Old Testament, the Torah, and the nation of and the belief that the Holy Land is Israel's homeland, which it is. I think the genetic data does support that claim, but so that technically is the root cause. However, I think it's definitely moved beyond that. It's moved much more into very secular reasons, into a matter of Lebensraum, for lack of a better word. And sorry to go German on a topic involving Jews, but it's about living space now and about territorial claims. It's not about which faith has the right to the land anymore. It's about who has the right to live there just based on who they are as a people, not so much faith anymore. It's still there, the faith element's still there, but I definitely think it's a back burner issue because there's a ton of secular Israelis. There's a ton of Israelis who are Jewish ethnically, but not necessarily Jewish in faith, who would happily support fighting the right of Israel to exist and fighting against Hamas for completely secular reasons, because they think Israel has a right to exist for secular reasons. So it started off as a religious thing, and I think some of the early wars in the 40s were very much about the faith, but it's definitely become a secular issue. I think, now as for American support, I think a lot of the Christians support it for the Christian Armageddon thing. I think that's part of it. The other thing I think is it's a longtime ally in the region, and I'm not sure. I think it's also due to some of the political ties and economic ties of Israelis and Israeli supporters. I don't know whether I can't think of many other actual religious reasons though. Other than that, and even those are pretty. I think a very somewhat minor sect. I think most people just support it because they think it's under attack and it's a secular country.
Well, speaking about that, about support, do you agree with the support that Israel supports, basically involving arms and stuff from the rest of the first world? If so, why? If not, why? And Imperian Cypher want to ask that question.
I just want to not to interrupt you, Nick, but I just want to say that it's also true that people who are Jewish ethnically in this country aren't necessarily aligned with these super quote unquote pro Israel groups. Like I was recently seeing somebody who was Jewish of heritage. She was an atheist. Long uninteresting story. But she was not she did not mince words when she thought Israel was wrong. She said that Israel was wrong. So the pro-Israel tangent in our government, the super right wing, and all too often in the Democratic Party, is not reflective of all Jewish people. You would think if that was the case, Republicans would get better numbers with Jewish people, but that's actually one of the strongest percentage-wise Democratic voting bases, even though the Democrats are not really much better on Israel, except a little bit, tiny bit in rhetoric.
Okay. That's a good point, Sean. I'm glad you jumped in with that. So the Cypher's question about arms, yes and no, Cypher. I mean, the big thing is the Western arms trade to Israel is one of the reasons why Israel has lasted as long as it has through history. It's one of the reasons why it was able to fight against Egypt and Syria and Lebanon all at the same time in many cases. and prevail and defend themselves because they had the Western arms trade, and it was a critical key to their existence. The no part would be where I would say start using that as leverage to get them to back off of Palestine, because they do need the arms trade. It's essential for them, and the money, the arms, the money and funds that go towards their military research. I mean, the Merkava tank was by Israel is perfect for the Israeli forces and what they need. I mean, it's not as great as they touted. The 2005 invasion of Lebanon kind of showed that, but it's an APC and a tank. But the research and the money behind to make these things is expensive. We need to use that to get Israel to back off. This is leverage. This is where we have a chance. And I know the problem is in America, anyone who even proposes this, the right wing will go ballistic over it. They'll say you don't support the existence of Israel and crap. We seriously have to move beyond that crap and actually get into the issue. Instead of saying anyone who doesn't think who thinks X therefore must think Israel shouldn't exist. And to a lesser extent on the other side too, there's that similar problem. Is like there's the perception that if you're pro-Israel, therefore you're anti-Palestine. Not at all. You can be pro both all the way. But it's the rhetoric on the one side, and that if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Israel, is much stronger than the Palestine side. So that's a big problem. But yeah, the arms trade should be used as leverage. It should be used to make Israel sort of back off from the crap they're pulling. The settlements in particular, and especially the recent tensions with Hamas. It can be used as a weapon to make Israel come to the table. And if they do that enough, Hamas or the Palestinians will be more willing to come to the table. Right now, they view the Israelis as people who are dropping bombs on their kids while they're at the beach. That's not a good image you want to set if you're trying to genuinely strive for peace. You want peace, you need to be a lot more restrained. And I totally understand that. I can say that in my cushy chair in London, Ontario, Canada, and nothing bad will happen to me. Whereas if I was in that part of the world, I'd probably be worried about my life every day, and I might be thinking a little dangerously and a little more aggressively. But
well, you know,
just like we don't leave the fate of a murderer up to the victim's the family of the victim. We should. Just because I'm not in Israel doesn't mean my opinion is wrong about this issue. I mean, you can't keep being so heavy-handed, and they need to back off. So.
All right. I think we can end the Q&A segment on that. Great questions, guys. If there's enough questions, maybe you guys can save them up, and we can have more for next Thursday. Hopefully, we'll have some different guests on next Thursday. Give some fresh questions from fresh perspectives. I'll see what I can do to book someone different.
Fine, I know when I'm not wanted.
No. But
hey, Jeff, could I tag in for just one real quick second here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I've been silent during this whole conversation because there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to, in 30 seconds that's going to, revolutionize somebody's stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But what I can say is if you've got a couple extra dollars floating around in your pocket somewhere, go to cpt.org, specifically cpt.org/work/Palestine, and give some money to these guys. These are Christian peacemaker teams. This is a organization that exists to non-violently protect people from violence. And they have projects all around the world, but the Palestinian one's relevant to our conversation right now. And so what they do is stuff like, obviously their mission's changed here a little bit because there's a war zone. But even during times of peace, what they would do is whenever the Israelis were coming in and bulldozing homes for quote-unquote settlements, these people would stand between the homes and the bulldozers, stuff like that, to save Palestinian lives without taking Israeli lives. So float a couple bucks their way, get in contact with them, find out what you can do to help. It's a great organization.
Let me just jump in and also further endorse the organization Jordan just mentioned, because you got to be part of the challenge is there's a lot of trouble with donating things to Palestine, because obviously the big fear is Will the people who actually need it get it? Will it go to Hamas? Will sell it or buy more arms or something? This is, I think, an excellent organization that would be safe and a great way to help the cause and make sure that your money is actually going to the right place. So, Jordan, I'm so happy you brought that group in and that you gave them that little plug. It's perfect, and I really hope people actually help them out.
Right. And that organization is that's great. I just remember I would just remind people that make sure you're donating like that. I'm not saying anything disparaging about that, but people who donate to funds that they think help Palestine end up on terrorist watch lists. So be very careful. That website is that group is not like among what I'm talking about, but like if you're a Muslim American, you know what I mean.
All right. Anyway, thank you guys for sending in the questions. Make sure to send in more for next week if you guys are interested in us doing another Q&A segment. Definitely love your questions. Thank you for sending them in. Thank you for spending a good couple of hours with us watching here on TYT Community, the Social Justice Hour. Make sure to tune in, of course, next week, Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, here on TYT Nation. We'll have the link up on our Facebook page, and of course, our friend TYT Talk will have the link posted for you as well, right after the Young Turks main show. You can visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/TYT Nation and TYT Community, and follow me on Twitter at Jeff's Politics and at TYT Community, our official Twitter account. Nick, you need a Twitter. You need to get with the program. You need to get with the 21st century. You are living.
Yeah. Cypher's already giving me crap, Jeff. Not you too. God.
You're living in the MySpace era. You might as well be friends with MySpace Tom.
I am not. I'm living in the Facebook era, and that's it.
Gotta get with the tweeter. You gotta be like Rick Perry and go follow him on the tweeter. Anyway, speaking of Twitter, of course, like I said, you can follow me at TYT Community, and of course TYT Talk tweets us out. Thank you so much to you TYT Talk, Imperial Cypher, whatever you want to go as, and I want to thank all you for joining us in the room, chatting with us. It's always a lot of fun, so we look forward to seeing this community start to grow even further. So, with that said, speaking of growth, there's one more plug. Of course, our Patreon page, patreon.com/TYT Nation. If you do want to see us continue to grow, continue to see the sets get better, maybe actually get a studio where we can all do this in high-tech fashion, which would be fantastically awesome. Every journey begins with $1 or whatever you'd like to donate, or of course just like and share this video. That helps immensely as well. So, if you could, guys, before you leave, give us a like. So, if you haven't already. And that's it for us. You guys have a fantastic weekend. We'll see you back on Thursday, and I'll be chatting with you back on Monday in the chat room. So, to everyone here from TYT Community, you have a good weekend. Say goodbye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night,
God bless.
everybody.
Night. By the way, Jeff, the TYT Community question segment should be